friendly to service disruption. Into May, that meant trying to canvass the March election and conducting an all-mail May election at the same time when public health guidance for combating the virus was still emerging. Clerks then managed to find new election equipment, replace poll workers with many of their regulars unavailable, and move voting locations so they could hold the August state primary. In August, clerks managed to administer yet another election successfully under extremely difficult conditions. November was the greatest challenge of all. Election workers have been on a marathon to ensure our elections can continue to run. The 2 months leading up to November 3rd required, among many other things, printing, testing, and distributing millions of ballots, serving voters continuously by mail and in person, hiring and training poll workers, and running a busy election day, all in the middle of a pandemic. Election day was a long one in many communities, as we expected. Despite meticulous preparation, clerks knew the sheer volume of absentee ballots would mean going late into the night and at least the following day to finish counting all ballots. They got that done too, with barely time for a nap before the county canvases began. That final 12-day push, running on fumes, culminated in a successful certification of the county election results you have before you. Now, none of this just happened. Election work is essential, so on paper, the work has to get done no matter what. But in the real world, what that meant was election workers sacrificing continuously and tirelessly to staff election offices when many others had the luxury of staying home. For clerks, evenings and weekends off became a thing of the past. Even working 7 days and nights a week, there were scarcely hours in the day. At the Bureau, we've spoken to clerks and staff who have overcome any challenge you can imagine. Budgets slashed, colleagues sidelined, and buildings closed, even friends and family members lost, with little time to mourn. Other clerks on the ballot themselves have endured election defeats. Other clerks on the ballot themselves have endured election defeats and still continue doing their civic duty. Few see or well understand the dedication it takes to run an election. That means that clerks typically only hear from members of the public who are not happy. It also means that despite their constant dedication, clerks have sometimes been the subject of unfair criticism, abuse, and even threats. Despite all this, I cannot thank election workers enough for the sacrifice, courage, and commitment to our state that they have shown throughout the year. They achieved what is, at the very least, the greatest accomplishment in election administration in recent memory. They understand better than anyone the importance of this work and the efforts that went into getting us to this point. I'm immensely grateful also to my staff on the Bureau of Elections for their tireless efforts in support of this election, and also for the tremendous support we've received from the entire Department of State, other state agencies, and other federal partners. All of this work is also essential in supporting the achievements of our election officials this year. As the board is aware, the board has received requests that a delay certification or that a special audit be conducted in response to claims from some of irregularities in the administration of the election. The Bureau has not identified any irregularities this year other than the typical occasional human error that is always part of the process. Overall, we had an extremely well-run and secure election. The Bureau did not identify anything anomalous in the county certified election results, suggesting large-scale irregularities. Michiganders voted for candidates of both parties, as they always do. They elected 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans in Congress. They elected a majority of one party to the State House of Representatives and members of the other party to President and U.S. Senate. They elected bipartisan slates of candidates to statewide education and university boards. As indicated in the staff report, there were several errors in the reporting of unofficial results. This happens every election, and we will continue to work on improvements to the process to reduce the extent to which it occurs. Importantly, however, none of these errors affected how the hand-marked paper ballots that we use to vote are actually counted by ballot tabulators. Any errors in the reporting of unofficial results were quickly caught soon after they occurred or during the county canvass, when canvassers reviewed tabulator tapes before certifying official results. Because some comments had focused on Detroit, I will also note that we saw there a reduction in the clerical errors that led to precincts being out of balance. That is, when records show the number of ballots tabulated does not match exactly the poll book number. Although we need continued improvement in this area, by any metric, November was a better run election in Detroit than the August primary or the November 2016 general. The percentage of balanced or explained precincts in Detroit was 72%, up from 42% in November 2016 and up from 54% in August of this year. The percentage of precincts that can be recounted is likely significantly higher than 72% because we can recount it if the number of ballots in the ballot container matches the tabulated total, a figure not reflected in the out-of-balance totals. We likely will have several recounts across the state following certification, including in Wayne County, before audits occur. In auditing jurisdictions after certification, those with out-of-balance precincts will be a point of focus, and I expect that we will find, as we typically do, that these issues can be explained, can be fixed by process improvement, and do not mean that votes were not properly counted. By performing a statewide risk-limiting audit, as we did after March, we will also be able to confirm that our tabulators counted ballots accurately. Finally, I'll just note that under our election law, these audits must occur after certification because we don't have legal authority to inspect the materials we need until that time. Therefore, despite the request to start audits sooner, we have not identified any provision of law that would allow for some sort of special pre-certification audit or authority for the board to conduct that. On that point, however, in closing, I will just pass it off to Heather Mindgas from the Attorney General's office, who may have some additional clarification or elaboration on that point. And then with that, I will just hand it off, and thank you again.
Heather? Thank you, Director Brader. I would just echo Jonathan's comments that we've looked at the issue of whether the board has the authority to request an audit itself before choosing or voting on the manner of certification, or whether some other person can compel upon the board and request the board to do such an audit. And if we're talking about an audit as used in the Constitution and the statute, which is MCL 168.31A, both of those, both the Constitution and the statute, clearly contemplate that we are conducting audits post-election. In other words, the Constitution itself gives people the right to request an audit of a statewide election result. And so we don't have statewide results until this board certifies. So under the Constitution, it would have to be interpreted as well to contemplate post-election audits. And then I think if you look at Section 168.31A as well, the language there also makes it clear that it contemplates post-election audits, and it clarifies that an audit does not act as a recount, nor does it change certified results. So that language itself suggests that we're looking at an audit post-election. I would just echo Director Brader's comments with respect to the ability to hold an audit or conduct an audit as that phrase is used in the Constitution or the statute itself.
Chairwoman Bradshaw?
Yes.
I would like to make a motion. Based on an examination of the election returns received by the Secretary of State for the November 3rd, 2020 general election, we, the Board of State Canvassers, certify that the attached reports are true statements of the votes cast at the election for the offices certified by this board and for the electors of President and Vice President of the United States. We will further certify that the persons named on the attached listing were duly elected for the indicated offices and that state proposals 20-1 and 20-2 passed.
Is there support?
At this point, I would just request that we hear more public testimony and hear more from the people who have requested to speak here today. And I'm not saying I'm for or against this motion right now, but at this point, we have a list of people ready to speak today. We have, I don't know how many members of the public who have signed up to speak, and I would just ask us to take some time, listen to them first, and then we can consider this motion.
I would say that we put the motion on the floor and then we can discuss it. I would rather have it out front as opposed to the 780 or 800 public comments that are listed. I would encourage people when they're making comments to speak to the motion, however. So I continue to move this.
I would continue to ask that we have additional time to listen to public testimony at this point in time. And I think, I think this duty, the board's duty today is very clear. We have a duty to certify this election based on the return. That is very clear. And we are limited to these returns. And I'm not going to argue that we're not. But I still think the people who have signed up to speak today should have the chance to speak before we act on this motion. So I will make that statement. I think we're pretty limited today. I think we've got a duty to do this. But I also think we owe it to the people to allow them to speak.
And I don't in any way want to keep anybody from speaking, but I would like this motion on the floor with a second so we can stay focused on that.
So I have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Not at this time.
I will second the motion. Is there discussion on the motion?
So how do we wish to proceed hearing people's comments? I know that there's a lot of people on the line.
Board members, I do have a number of people who wish to speak, and I will like to call the first one, if I may, and that would be Chris Thomas, former Director of Elections.
Just a quick question. With the motion on the table, though, can we hold for the time being, or do we need to act on it?
So I would consider this part of the discussion of the motion.
Fair point.
Okay. Do we have Chris Thomas? It looks like we do.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Chris, I believe we can hear you. There's a little bit of a pause, so I want to make sure. So if you can state and spell your first name for the record, please. First and last name, I'm sorry.
Yes, it's Christopher Thomas, CHRISTOPHER, Thomas, THOMAS. Pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm here to answer questions, specifically told that Mr. Schinkel may have some. As you're aware, I have been working with the Detroit City Clerk as a senior advisor during the general election. My time with her is from mid-September until mid-December. I have been involved with the planning for the general election, dealing with the TCF operation, and several other issues with satellite sites, drop boxes, and whatnot. I've been impressed with the city of Detroit's turn that they have made since 2016 and since the August primary of this year. As you know, there is no jurisdiction anywhere near the size or complexity of Detroit in our 1,500 cities and townships. Detroit had 174,000 mail ballots, representing 68% of the vote. That is more than double the amount that they had in the primary, which was also a record at that time at 81,000. So the desire to vote by mail in a time of pandemic was palpable in the city of Detroit. I talked with Ms. Winfrey last spring when they were putting together plans on how they would handle an election by mail. They have moved in the area of high-speed tabulators, which really were a lifesaver in terms of being able to manage and report in a timely basis the unofficial results. At some point in our meeting, Daniel Baxter should be on here. He was a former director in Detroit and ran the TCF operation. They made great strides in terms of accountability with the balloting, the check-in, and the tabulation compared to the primary. Director Brader has indicated in his staff report some very positive indications of Detroit's increase in terms of accuracy and accountability. And I'm going to say that this board should understand that you played a role in that. You have raised your voice about not only Detroit, but other jurisdictions, but in most particularly with Detroit, in terms of their processing of absentee ballots back in 2016 and again in this primary. There have been resources from the city applied, and they have had a benefit. Is there work still to be done? Yes. And there's commitments to continue that work. New technology has been brought to bear on this process, and in the future is going to have even more beneficial effects. The fact of the matter is Detroit, like many jurisdictions in the state, had a tsunami of mail ballots descend upon it and dealt with them as best we could. I think it's incredible for the clerks of this state and also of Detroit that they could make a pivot from a 70% in-person voting or 75% in-person voting environment to close to a 70% by mail voting environment in the middle of a pandemic. When I first started talking to Ms. Winfrey about the 2020 election last spring, it was in the midst of a time when she and many people in the city of Detroit knew folks who had died from the pandemic. I'm over on the west side of the state in St. Joseph. We're experiencing much of what they experienced in Detroit last March and April. We were not hard hit in the spring, and it seemed somewhat foreign to me, but it was absolutely clear that people had fear of that pandemic and really were attempting to avoid large public gatherings. So hence the planning that went into providing a vote by mail. With 21 satellite sites set up and 30 drop boxes around the city, Detroit's voters were given that opportunity and they took advantage of it. And I'm pleased with what has occurred. So when you look at what was done in the polling place, and again, you need to hear from Daniel Baxter today, but you know, the first city in the state to use the electronic poll book in an absent voter counting board provided critical accountability. We use Reliavote, which is a technology to check in ballots and to try to keep the accountability going. We use counting boards, not precincts. So in the primary, we use precincts because precinct delegates made each ballot unique. In the general election, we use counting boards. We're the only jurisdiction that's allowed to do that by law. And a counting board is an accumulation of several precincts with the same ballot form. So all the candidates' offices and proposals are the same. So a counting board may have 6 precincts in it, 1 precinct in it, 5 precincts in it. So the 501 precincts are filtered into 134 boards. So that's how the operation was run. So at this point, you know, I would point you to Director Brader's report. He has indicated, I think, some very positive increases in the accountability that Detroit has brought to this process. And I'm going to be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions from the board members for Mr. Thomas?
Okay, my My button is green.
All right. Chris, it's good to hear you. Chris and I talked, it was just yesterday. It seemed like a week ago, Chris.
Yeah.
I went over a bunch of stuff with Chris, and I warned him out to ask a particular question. But for anyone to say that this election in November went smoothly, I suppose we can compare it to August, which was a total mess. You might say there's improvements, but smoothly is not accurate at all. So, Chris, our statute that we operate under, there's a sentence in there about certifying the statewide election, that we have a power to adjourn from time to time and await the receipt or correction of returns or for other necessary purposes. And shall complete the canvass and announce determination no later than the 40th day after the election. Today's the 20th. So, Chris, what I told you I was going to ask you is, under what circumstances could there be out there that you would think you can delay for other purposes?
Well, first of all, part of the question you said you're going to ask is whether you could ever vote no on a certification. And
delaying is voting no for today.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think that first of all, the answer is, of course, you can't vote no. There is no in this circumstances. Each of you play a necessary role. You're at the pinnacle of Michigan's democracy. You're the end game of the statewide elections for 2020. Our system is a zero-sum operation. You got winners, you got losers. We don't have any ties. Everyone doesn't get a trophy. That's not the way it works. However, at the end of the season, after 5.5 million people have taken to the field and exercised their right to vote, we had tens of thousands of our citizens have turned out to work in difficult and dangerous times. And over 1,600 county, city, and township clerks and their staff have conducted and prepared for this election. And the 83 boards of canvassers have canvassed this election. You, the Board of State Canvassers, representing the two major political parties, convene in a public meeting to make the results that are already widely known official. So your civility, which is so needed today, shows our citizens that a system they may take for granted works. Michigan election law does not need to tell you that yes is the only option, because without a yes, you don't have anything. There's no election, no winners, no losers, no beginning of Michigan's next chapter. So our law says you may adjourn to await returns and corrections to those returns. But of course, it doesn't say you can vote no and go home. So those who question the outcome, the remedy stage begins after you say yes. Recounts, audits, investigations are all out there waiting for you to act. The legislature is giving you a role in recounts, but clearly it is not giving you authority to conduct pre-certification audits. So can you adjourn? Yes, you can adjourn. If you have the completed returns, I don't think you can adjourn. What else is there for a county to do? They have lost their jurisdiction. They can no longer canvass. You have got their statement as to what the certified votes are in their respective counties. So what would you be waiting for?
Okay, well, you're asking me questions, and I asked you the question. And Chris, it does say at the bottom of the sentence, shall complete our canvass and announce their determination no later than the 40th day. So what you're saying is those words shouldn't be in there. We should announce our certification of the election no later than the 40th day. Would that be correct?
No, I think that you're mandated to certify when you have the complete results. There's no reason to sit on it for 40 days. Because I would ask you, okay, if I can't ask you questions, I would rhetorically ask, well, what would you do for 40 days? I mean, what would you do for 40 days? You don't have authority to do an audit. So what would you do? I mean, why would you sit on something for 40 days when you
Chris, what you're
have
saying then,
everything you need?
there is no other necessary purpose. There is no other necessary purpose that we could have. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I'm not sure how you would suggest what that would be. Maybe somebody gets ill. Maybe two people get ill and you lose a quorum. I don't know. But I mean, yeah, those words are there. But
Chris,
what
I
is
think
what is the
that's
necessary
I
purpose?
warned you yesterday I was going to bring this up, and I think we got Chris's answer.
Okay, guys. I know, Vice Chair Langenfeld.
Good afternoon, Mr. Thomas, how are you? Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Thomas, how are you?
I'm very good. It's nice to see you.
Good. I think there's some important things you said here, and I think it's really important for us to clarify the board's role. I think one of the, big things out there is the fact that there's a lot of misunderstanding about this board's role and the power that we have, the authority that we have. You're pretty familiar with election law too, so I think you're a good person to do that. So I'm looking at section 841 of the election code, and it basically says the board of canvassers shall canvass the returns and determine the result of the election. Okay? And I'm going to focus in on the word shall. I mean, this means must, right?
It means shall. I mean, the state Supreme Court has gotten into shall and made shall, yes.
So you would agree with me that this board has a legal duty, correct?
I would definitely agree with you.
So the law basically says we have a legal duty, or a clear legal duty, to canvass returns. Those returns are basically the certified copies from the counties, correct?
That is correct.
And I mean, are you aware, and I know you've got an extensive background, are you aware of any legal authority out there that allows us to review more than those returns as part of this certification process?
I am not. I mean, I have, been with you all when you certified numerous elections. And I have never experienced a time when, one, it's come up, or two, there's been any contemplation of going beyond the face of the certifications presented to the board.
So am I correct in saying, I mean, we're not a court here. We don't have judicial power. We don't have the authority to conduct a trial here on whether or not election fraud occurred. Am I correct?
You are correct. And the Court of Appeals has told this board in no uncertain times in the petition arena that they are a ministerial body required to follow the dictates of law and not a tribunal to decide legal matters or constitutional questions. And I would think they would say pretty much the same thing here, is that you're not a body to investigate fraud. You don't have the tools to do that. The statute doesn't give you the authority to mandate documents or compel testimony. So you can't really investigate fraud. I mean, the Secretary of State cannot even investigate fraud. She can investigate the conduct of elections based on what election officials do. But if the fraud is outside of that arena, that goes to police powers, not even to the Secretary of State.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions for Mr. Thomas from the board? Well, thank you, Mr. Thomas. I really appreciate you coming and speaking with us today.
It's my pleasure.
I do have another individual I'd like to bring on, and that would be Daniel Baxter, former Director of Elections for the City of Detroit. Mr. Baxter, can you hear us? I believe you might have to unmute.
Are we there?
I believe we can hear you now. Thank you, Mr.
All right,
Baxter.
good. Good.
You
Thank
could,
you.
spell your first and last name, and the floor is yours after that.
Yes, my name is Daniel Baxter. That's D-A-N-I-E-L Baxter, B-A-X-T-E-R. I'd like to first and foremost thank you for the opportunity to come before this body and share information associated with the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election. As Chris mentioned, I was placed in charge of all activities associated with the tabulation of absentee ballots for the presidential election. After the primary election, City Clerk Janice Winfrey reached out to me to ask me whether or not I would be willing to assist in this monumental endeavor. I certainly was honored to accept that opportunity. And as such, the clerk and I, along with numerous staff members, along with the Office of the Secretary of State, along with the Wayne County Elections Department, we sat down and had a conversation in terms of what elements were needed in order to ensure more efficiency and accuracy associated with the tabulation of absentee ballots for the November election. And as a result of that conversation, we did a couple of things. One thing that we wanted to make sure was that we didn't run into some of the challenges that we ran into for the primary election. That being not having enough staff to man the operation and staff leaving without completing or tabulating all of the absentee ballots. And as such, we began to do a recruitment operation that included recruiting younger and more energetic Central Counting Board staff. We reached out to the Divine Nine, which are Black fraternities and sororities within metropolitan Detroit. We reached out to the ecumenical community, churches such as Triumph, Greater Grace, Second Ebenezer Church. We reached out to businesses such as Blue Cross and Blue Shield and other local businesses, staff from Wayne County Community College, as well as City of Detroit employees and folk from the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, as well as our everyday citizen. And as a result of our recruitment endeavor, we had more than 4,000 people who applied to assist us to ensure that we were able to tabulate all of the absentee ballots for the November election. Because we were in a season of a pandemic and to attract more professional staff, we upped the ante in terms of our payroll. We paid our inspectors $600 for the day and our supervisors $700 for the day. To ensure that no one was overworked or left before the ballots were tabulated, we implemented shifts on Monday, November 2nd, from 7 a.m. to p.m., on 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. On Tuesday, November 3rd, folk worked from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. On Tuesday, November 3rd, in the evening, people worked from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. And then on Wednesday, folk worked from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. To ensure accuracy and efficiency, we also, as Chris mentioned, we implemented the electronic poll book. Also, we augmented training so that it was more effective. We did a hands-on operation where we employed all of our supervisors. They trained 8 to 10 hours to make sure that they understood every aspect of the operation. Part of their training was to report to the TCF Center and actually be trained alongside of those poll workers that they would be working with on election day. It was a hands-on operation in the sense that we actually allowed them to use the electronic poll book to follow every step as it relates to opening, processing, and closing. Each person understood every aspect of processing an absentee ballot, from your standard ballot to any ballots that you might run into that may have problems. We were excited because so many people participated in this particular process. And to process the anticipated high volume of absentee ballots, we also increased the use of our high-speed tabulators. From the primary election, we went from 18 high-speed tabulators to 25. And for the primary election, we also increased our adjudication stations from 9 to 13. We've trained and prepared for election day from Wednesday, September 23rd through Saturday, October 31st. And then came Monday, November 2nd. From November 2nd to November the 4th, from Monday to Wednesday, and all the way up until Thursday morning. It was perhaps one of the most exciting and engaging endeavors that I've ever had the opportunity to be a part of since working at the Department of Elections. You have to remember, I started working at the Department of Elections in 1985. One of my first jobs here was as a POC, which is the Political Organizations Coordinator down at the Central Counting Board. From 1985 to 2005, my main feature was to work at the Central Counting Board. And in 2005, I was in charge of every aspect of that operation. I've had an opportunity to witness so many changes in terms of elections. I've had the opportunity to go from punch card to electronic voting systems. I had the opportunity to witness a write-in candidate election that was an amazing feat. And in 2008, I had the opportunity to be a part of that entire operation where so many people engaged in the voting process for the first time in so many years in the city of Detroit. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to the experience that I had and many people had at the TCF Center on those particular days. It was a day of great pride, not only just for myself, but for those poll workers and for the city of Detroit at large. No matter what happened on election day, whether or not challengers shouted "stop the vote" in the TCF Center, whether or not they were violating social distancing rules, or whether they stood in the middle of the processing center without their mask on, nothing, and I mean nothing, deterred our poll workers from being engaged. They stayed focused throughout that entire operation. And then on last week, when the Wayne County Board of Canvassers decided to certify, and we're so glad that they did, I was proud that one of our supervisors had the opportunity to offer public comment during that particular exchange. And she explained the process from the beginning to the end with complete accuracy. So I was so excited to see that and to see her stand up and demonstrate the integrity of the process that was executed on November 2nd and 3rd. And in closing, I just want to share this with you. Every day since 1985, when you enter into the Department of Elections, on the wall is a quote from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And it says, "And that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth." everything that we do here at the Department of Elections. Whatever it is that we carry into the bill, whatever it is that we have going on outside of the building, we never deal with that. We're always about a nonpartisan operation that is focused on making sure that every vote counts. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share with you. And if you have any questions for me, I'm here to answer them. Thank you.
Is there any questions for Mr. Beck?
Mr. Baxter, I think I was with you in the Cobo Hall basement. I was there in 10 and 12. And,
Yes, sir.
I don't remember talking to me, but my first question is, after the election was over, was there any count board of several precincts that may be out of balance by up to 600 votes? Do you recall that?
Pardon me? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Okay, my question is, the count boards after the election, were any of them out of balance, one of which was up to 600 votes? Does that make any sense to you?
Well, I know that we had 3 counting boards that did not report as of Wednesday night. And those 3 counting boards were rerun during the canvass. And it would appear that the difference exceeded 600. So when the county reran those particular counting boards, they were processed and included in the official report.
So they were in balance at the end?
I know one balanced. The other 2 may not have been in balance at that particular time upon certification.
Okay, the electronic poll book, the supplemental poll book, the additional poll book list, whatever you want to call it, when was that finalized?
That was finalized on Election Day, on November 3rd.
November 3rd. And
So I'm sorry, let me go back. The electronic poll book was printed and reported or produced on Sunday night, which was November 1st. On November 2nd, when we began the pre-processing operation, we employed the electronic poll book.
okay.
Then on November 3rd, what we did was we produced the supplementals in the event that any of the poll workers, when they were processing the absentee ballots, ran into any type of issues where that name was not in the electronic poll book. If the name was not in the electronic poll book, then they were responsible for looking that name up on the supplemental document. If the name was there, they were to check it off and then process the ballot in its standard manner.
So the supplemental poll book was the last poll book, the so-called list that was developed?
That is correct.
Okay, and is there any reason that the statement could be true that all these lists were delivered to the Wayne County Board of Canvassers 13 days after the election? Any truth to that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Are you familiar with how the poll workers are hired?
Yes, I am. I'm familiar.
Are you familiar with the law that says that each major party should have one person of each party in every poll precinct?
Yes, I am familiar with that.
Okay, is it your opinion that we had 134 Republicans at the AV Count Board on election night?
No, there were not 134 Republicans at the Central Counting Board on November 2nd, 3rd, or the 4th. There is a...
In your opinion, Why wasn't the law followed, in your opinion?
Well, when we went to recruit Republican poll workers, we could not get the allotted number of poll workers to make sure that there were enough at each one of the tabulation stations or at each one of the central counting boards. And as such, we had to govern ourselves based upon standard operational procedures, which means that we continue to move forward with the tabulation of absentee ballots with the staff that we've received, recruited, and trained.
Well, Mr. Baxter, if somebody shows me a list of 100 people, Republicans, that applied to be poll workers to DAB Comp Board, and they were told it's full, we don't need them, and they are Republicans, does that make any sense to you?
I'm not aware of that.
Do you have any other questions, Norm?
No, I don't.
Is there any further questions from the board for Mr. Baxter? Thank you very much, Mr. Baxter.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to, the next person would be Jeff Timmer, who is a former member of the Board of State Canvassers.
All right. There,
Jeff?
am I on now?
Jeff, can you, I believe so. So Jeff, if you can spell and state your first and last name, and then the floor is yours.
Sure. Jeff Timmer, Jefftimmer. I will be very, very brief given the extensive testimony and questions and answers that we've already heard from the two previous speakers. I served on this board from 2009 to 2012 and served with two of the members sitting here before us today, and I know that they know their duty very well. If the board has all the required returns, it has no discretion. It has none. It has zero. The board must certify the results today. It is mandatory. Some have commented that today's meeting has heightened political impact. It does not. Rather, it is a routine ministerial function being performed here today. The same regular and predictable function that occurs after every election. Joe Biden won Michigan by a margin of more than 154,000 votes, a margin 15 times greater than the margin this board certified without fanfare 4 years ago. This election was not close. Neither was Gary Peters' defeat of John James. But whether the margin is 1 vote or 1 million votes is irrelevant to the legal obligations this board must fulfill today. Do your mandatory duty, certify Michigan's election results.
Is there any questions for Mr. Timmer?
Just briefly. Mr. Timmer, I just have a couple questions. And I don't want to be repetitive to what I already asked Mr. Thomas, but given your extensive experience on the board, I think it's also important to talk to you and kind of clarify the board's role a little bit more for members of the public. I agree with you. It's really all about the returns here today, what we received from the county. Are you aware of any legal authority, any authority in law, for us to go beyond those returns and to review anything else as part of the certification process here today?
I am not aware of any ability to do that there's any latitude to do that. My experience on the board was very clear, and there were times when, for instance, the board deadlocked on, say, petition language or the approval of a petition. And the mandamus actions were usually taken. The Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court issued an opinion and reminded us sometimes very bluntly that we had an obligation to do what was in the black letter of the law, that we did not have discretion. We did not have the luxury of inserting our opinions or what we thought should be the case, what we thought should be looked at, what we thought should be investigated. And so that was my experience.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? Thank you very much, Mr. Timmer, and thank you for your service on this board. Okay. The next person is Barb Byram, Ingham County Clerk. Okay. I'm actually going to move ahead to Susan Nash, Livonia City Clerk. And I just want to remind everyone, and thank you for joining us. I know that the times that we have right now are a little different because we are remote, but I just want to thank everyone for their time too. And it looks like we do have Susan. So Susan, if you can state and spell your first and last name and then your comments, please.
Susan Nash, SUSANNASH, Livonia City Clerk. I'm also the president of the Association of Wayne County Clerks. I would like to just briefly comment on how important it is for this vote to be certified. As Mr. Brader pointed out, we had record numbers of Michigan voices that came out to be heard, and they need to be heard. I'm not going to say there weren't mistakes, because I'm sure there were mistakes. And there were mistakes that were human error that shouldn't happen. As a clerk, I would like to see zeros on every one of my balance sheets. Unfortunately, we're not always going to get that. Perfection is not always going to be there. But I do believe the voices need to be heard. I also think there should be an audit. I'm all for an audit. I'm all for a random audit. I think we need our voters to feel safe and secure that their vote is going to be heard, that it's going to be counted, and it's going to be counted correctly. But we need to certify this election so we can move forward, so we can do an audit, so we can look into this, and we can let the voters know that everything was done, and everything was done as best as we could, and that we took care of them. And again, like I said, I just really wish this would be certified. From one of the largest communities, we doubled in absentee ballots. We had a difficult time getting people to work. And then all of a sudden we got a lot of people. When we were able to give hazard pay, then all of a sudden we had a lot of people willing to work. And I applaud them. I thank all of the people that came out to work. We went probably 300-400 people working election day for us in Livonia. That's huge. That's a huge undertaking. And I appreciate every one of them. I appreciate every one of my staff. And I appreciate every clerk in this state that worked very hard so that the voters of this state could have their voices heard. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you very much, Susan. Okay. And I'm going to say this very nicely. If I ever mispronounce people's names, my apologies beforehand.